Monday, October the 9th, 2017. And as our standing, start our meeting with the Holy Spirit. Thank you. Commissioner J. Farrell, would you lead us in the pledge?
Would everyone rise for the pledge? Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
We have the agenda before you. Matters on the consent agenda as well as the regular agenda. Are there any amendments or additions to the agenda? Either one.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda, including the modifications to the minutes that are here on our desk this evening.
Motion by Michael Fiocco to approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Jay Farrell. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. Motion carries. I would like to amend the regular agenda for the addition of a celebratory matter, ceremonial matter, a resolution that you have at your desk, which is the resolution in memory of Charles Wilbur Bryant. If that could be added, where would be appropriate? Would you like to do it? Yeah. All right. And the resolution reads, whereas Charles Wilbur Bryant was born on December 16, 1934, and died on June 16, 2017, and for 82 years, Chatham County and the town of Pittsboro were honored to have William Wilbur Bryant as a civic legend. And whereas Wilbur Bryant was born in the Gorgas community of Moncure on the Bryant family farm and was active at Mount View AME Zion Church, serving as pastor steward for over 30 years. And whereas his interest in politics led him to encourage friends and neighbors to vote in every election, and he transported many people, young and old, to the polls, as well as serving as precinct chair for Oakland Precinct and the first vice chair of the Chatham County Democratic Party. And whereas his community service posts are too numerous to name, but included the PTA, health boards, Council on Aging, NAACP, and the Chatham County Agricultural and Industrial Fair Association. And whereas the people of Chatham County and the town of Pittsboro will remember his dedication to the whole community, to the health of the community with his produce, and to the history that he made and savored. Therefore, be it resolved, the Town Board of Commissioners of the town of Pittsboro, on behalf of the citizens of the town, reflect upon the life well lived by Charles Wilbur Bryant and the gifts he gave to our community and to the democratic process. This resolution, approved at the regular meeting of the Board of Commissioners for the town of Pittsboro, held on October 9, 2017, and shall be entered in the town's public records and sent to members of the Bryant family. Is there a motion to approve the resolution?
Motion to approve the resolution.
Okay. Moved by Pamela Baldwin, seconded by Bette Wilson Foley. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. Thank you. Motion carries. We have public speakers tonight. Just one signed up under Citizens Matters, the next agenda item, and that is Leslie Landis. Leslie.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners and staff. My name is Leslie Landis. I live at 21 Randolph Court in Pittsboro, North Carolina. I come before you tonight as the owner of a small business and an avid and active fan of downtown Pittsboro. The mighty, mighty financial lift and personal and professional risk required to open a retail business in a historic downtown with aging buildings and infrastructures takes courage and vision. Fortunately, the good folks of Postal Seafood Restaurant are on board. James Clark and Bill Hartley and their families have committed themselves to bring their fresh seafood business to downtown Pittsboro, and with the design expertise of another locally owned small business, Hobbs Architects, are renovating our former post office building to modern standards. Concurrently, on the outskirts of Pittsboro, Chatham Park is developing modern facilities for living and working, which will keep this area prosperous to the envy of many across the state. You have been giving considerable time and attention to this massive project, and appropriately so. However, an active historic downtown and a successful new development can coexist and even be complementary, but both require attention. We don't want one to win out at the expense of another, so standing regulations that facilitate downtown revitalization may not be appropriate or even well considered for current needs, and may need more careful scrutiny. I'm here to ask you to vote or agree or resolve as a board, preferably tonight, to consider the ways the town of Pittsboro can creatively and sensitively and responsively work with small business owners to make their investments in our downtown less onerous and more timely, specifically Postal Seafood, which is on the cusp of opening. Your solutions will be a win-win for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Our next agenda item are commissioner updates and mayor updates. I feel like these are very familiar faces around the board tonight. We've had a lot of things together, workshops on finance and additional elements, and we've spent more time together in the last 2 weeks, I think, than we have with our own families. On the 26th of September, I attended a meeting for the Creekside Tenants Association. On the 27th, here with Ron Grusbeck, talked to the people from Waste Industries, our solid waste folks, and that was a very interesting conversation. On the 28th of September, gave opening remarks at the county fair. On the 29th of September, attended the event for the sheriff. On the 30th, a Boy Scout event. On the 4th of October, a ribbon cutting at OVM Financial. And on the 7th, a Habitat for Humanity event. So it's been a very active and interesting time. And are there any reports from the economic development or fairgrounds or Triangle J or climate change groups?
Been too busy to get a report from the climate change. We had a conflict last week. They haven't sent me a report yet.
I'll mention the two that did mention.
Oh, yes.
PBA in downtown. Next meeting is this Wednesday, 9 a.m. at the Roadhouse. And Main Street, Leslie just spoke. She failed to say anything about the town slogans. I'll say, yes, there's a town slogan contest ongoing, so please participate. Creative. Have to say that the Main Street Design Committee has found 2 locations for the other 2 kiosks. One is in front of the library entrance at CCCC. I have met with Mark Hall and designated a spot, so Brian will have to coordinate on that, how we go about installing that. The other one is in a high traffic area between the parking lot and the annex building. We found that that's a pretty high traffic area, so we've got to coordinate with the county to get an exact location as to where that can go. And we'll be doing that.
Great.
In reference to the fairground, I'd like to thank everyone that did attend. It was really a success, and hopefully next year it'll be even larger than that. If we get more attendance, the larger the fair can be. But I do thank everyone that did attend and participated, even if they had things on the exhibit, just as our mayor did. We thank you for that. Look forward to next year. Thank you.
In case you missed it, the Bland and Perry family just really cleaned up on the blue. We had okra and peppers and been a lot of herbs. It was a big year for herbs. And part of it is the fair is at such a time that it's hard to have certain kinds of produce. So, you know, your green beans and your peas and the things like that are all well past gone. So, anyway, it's so much fun to go and see what your produce is done. All right. Old business. Victoria Bailiff is going to lead us in a discussion about the annexation request on Eubanks Road.
Okay. So annexation A 2017-06. Chatham Park investors have proposed the annexation of 10.223 acres located on the northwest corner of the U.S. Highway 64 Business and Eubanks Road intersection. The parcel is zoned PDD and is currently vacant. A public hearing was held on September 25th, 2017. No citizens spoke. I believe the applicant wishes to speak.
Mayor, council members, Ken Eagle here on behalf of Chatham Park, 2235 Gateway Access Point, Raleigh. We would ask, well, first of all, this site plan came before the planning board at its meeting earlier this month, and it was continued until their next meeting in November. There were some questions, mostly of a technical nature that the planning board had. And as you know, that same evening, we were at a meeting on sewer issues in another location, and the person who could have best answered those questions was at our meeting and not at the planning board meeting. And so we would just ask that, because the site plan hasn't come to you yet, that you would consider tabling the annexation request until you can have the site plan at the same time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a motion to set it for the next, would it be the next meeting, Brian, or would it be the following?
13.
You say specifically that it's been,
After the planning board acts?
or when we have the site plan.
Yeah.
So moved.
Okay. Moved by Beth Wilson Foley, seconded by Pamela Baldwin. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries.
Okay. We have annexation A 2017-07, Moncure Pittsburgh Road. Chatham investors have proposed the annexation of 44.86 acres located off of Moncure Pittsburgh Road, north of the Charlie Brooks Road intersection. The area is zoned PDD and is currently vacant. The applicant is not proposing that this location be served by water or wastewater. A public hearing was held on September 25th, 2017. No citizens spoke, and the recommendation is to enter into this memorandum of understanding with Chatham.
Are there questions from the board? Does the applicant wish to speak, or is the...
Yes, please.
Thank you. Can you go again?
We had hoped that we would be able to file this annexation petition as required by the master plan. Again, for the record, Ken Eagle on behalf of Chatham Park, I'm sorry. And there had been discussions between me and the town attorney about filing the petition but not actually annexing the property until such time as services were actually requested for the property, since this doesn't need any town services really at this point in time. And we had proposed an agreement to that effect, which probably is in your package of materials tonight. And so we would again renew the request that the annexation on this be postponed as provided in that proposed agreement that you have in front of you.
That's the memorandum of understanding that we have our desk tonight.
How many pages is that in on here?
description of the property.
Well, I've got some questions for staff, and that is, does staff feel as though there will be issues providing service to this property? I'm thinking in particular Chief Crutchfield. Do you think that there's going to be an issue having to provide police service to the property?
I'm sorry. What was the question? I was reading something else.
Wondering if this property is annexed, if you're going to find it costly or a problem providing police coverage to the property.
It's Tinker Solar Farm.
You're talking about the Pittsburgh Monkey Road?
Yes.
Right there near the old chicken plant?
No, it's Charlie Brooks Road.
Oh, Charlie Brooks Road? We already cover our Rock Ridge Park, which is approximately 2.5 miles out of town. That's actually our responsibility also. So, I mean, as it develops, what develops it to make us increase our staff on calls for service, but accessibility would be my question.
Right. They're proposing a gravel road.
Yeah, I mean,
12 feet long.
as long as it's accessible. And
when the master plan and PD first came to be, the thinking was at the time, well, let's annex the entire 7,000 acres. And that seemed unfeasible. And thereby created the condition in the master plan that says for every land development proposal that is coming forth, that it be accompanied by this request for annexation. That was the idea that we would get tax revenue as development occurred. So, it doesn't make sense to me to defer it. I'm happy to annex it this evening.
Other questions or thoughts about the annexation?
Just don't read where this MOU says don't read that it actually does anything. What am I missing?
It defers annexation until such time as the applicant needs water or sewer.
I don't see those words
I don't know.
on this page. We're on the second page.
There's a page missing. That's fine.
Yeah.
The one in our package has the third page. Like the second page.
Yeah, I couldn't find it in the package either.
That's the first one. There's the second page. That's it. There it is. That's what.
You can't read.
No, that's fair.
So, I appreciate Commissioner Kyoko's question about police protection and fire protection is also something that is occasionally, maybe even rarely, needed for solar sites.
This property would be covered by the Pittsburgh Fire Department under either the ETJ or the town, either way.
with 12-foot access road?
They've been actively involved in the review process.
It's good to hear.
And I think some modifications to the plan was made because of the comments of the fire department.
Very good.
Are there further questions or thoughts that we need to consider?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Commissioner Fiocco. With the, we've had numerous meetings regarding the master plan and all like this, and we're not going to go by what's in the master plan, what's going to be the next requirement, or what's going to be the next property or site plan, or what's going to happen next. We have heard in numerous meetings, well, it's in the master plan like this, it's in the master plan like this. So, personally myself, I'm on the teeter-totter of it either way, but I feel like we should go by our master plan because that is the plan for this development.
The master plan requires them to petition for annexation, and they have. That's all the master plan deals with. It's up to you to accept the petition or not, or to wait.
Okay.
But it's to wait until they have a need for water and sewer, but they might not ever need water and sewer.
Right. That's true.
Well, and the other thing that we know is that things are changing pretty rapidly with energy, and it's conceivable that this solar field would be repurposed in 15, 20, or 30 years.
If they wait until there's a need for water and sewer, that might not happen.
Yep, and then do we really want to, at this moment in time, build that infrastructure out to that site for solar panels that will not be producing sewage? And what are the plans for cleaning the panels? Will there be a well on site, or is there a plan to use city water for cleaning the panels?
Jeremy Spade, civil engineer of Strata. There's no, it's basically they get cleaned by rainfall. They're tilted, so when the rain vents clean them off. Some events you could wash them with a broom sort of device, but yeah, there'd be no well water on site.
And I think that this was addressed when we were looking at the solar farm to be done on Hanks Chapel Road, but
yes.
My concern is we're not using pesticides on the grasses below the solar panels.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Herbicides,
I'm sorry.
Yep, that's correct. That's our standard procedure.
Okay.
Not to use them.
You're putting in a grass which does not grow to a particularly tall stature, is that right?
Yep, that's preferable, and then it'll be regularly maintained by normal mowing methods.
Would you want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the annexation.
Second.
Moved by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Bette Wilson Foley. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries.
So, Mrs. Mayor, I need to recuse myself of this next item, since my company was part of the design team. So, if I can be excused, I will step behind.
Okay. So Victoria is going to lead us in a discussion of the addition to the Pittsburgh United Methodist Church.
This is section SP 2017-03. The Pittsburgh United Methodist Church has submitted plans for approval. The site, 71 West Street, is zone C4 Central Commercial, and it is composed of 2 parcels totaling 1.77 acres. The proposal is to construct a 14,605 square foot structure just south of the existing church and cemetery. The existing church will remain in its current location, and parcel lines are to be adjusted so that the churches will be located on separate parcels and will still be able to meet impervious surface requirements. The architects have provided elevations for Fayetteville Street. The plans for this site have been reviewed in accordance with the town's applicable development ordinances by the appropriate departments, and staff is recommending approval. The planning board reviewed the site plan at its meeting on October 2nd, and in a vote of 6-0 recommended approval.
I had two questions. One of them pertains to parking. I noticed that there are now 20 spaces behind the church, and I know that the church parks cars on the street for services, and also in the two parking lots on the western side of, what would that street be, Fayetteville Street?
Fayetteville.
So but there are very, very few places.
C4 does not have any parking, off-street parking requirements, so they are not required to have any parking on that lot,
Okay.
actually.
There are 4 or 5 handicap spaces there, because those would be totally inappropriate for using the lots across Fayetteville Street. I guess there might be, are there 1 or 2 perhaps in front of the church on the street?
I believe there's one handicap down here.
Okay.
And I think there's one across the street up at the corner over here.
And I noticed on the site plan, there's not a requirement for a sprinkler. Can you tell me why? 14,000 square feet seems like a very large area to not have protected. Of course, the fire department. Oh, okay. The applicant? Would the applicant like to speak to that?
Good evening. My name is Jared Martinson. I'm an architect with MHA Works Architects. We're located in Durham, North Carolina, and we're here tonight representing the Pittsburgh United Methodist Church. Good evening. I believe there was a question first about parking. Was there any continuing questions about that while I'm up here? We believe there are around 2 or 3 existing handicap parking spaces on the church's property currently behind the existing church building.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually increasing that number to, I believe, 5. The second question, I believe, had to do with the requirement for a fire protection system. There actually is an exception within the building code for assembly spaces used singularly for the place of worship that provide an exemption for churches. And we've had meetings and with members of town staff and with the town fire department to confirm those understandings.
The fire department did not push you guys to put sprinklers in for safety or anything?
No, sir. They didn't push us towards it. We did have a couple. No, we had a couple conversations and saw that point, that exception within the building code, and we have not submitted for building permit. So the topic could come up again, but we don't expect it to, because we did have those courtesy coordination conversations ahead of that. I will say, I guess further, there is a pretty heavy fire-rated separation within the building between the main assembly space and some of the ancillary spaces, like the bathrooms or the nursery within the building.
So there are children in the building?
Yes, that's correct.
In the nursery. Questions by the board?
So I'll say that I pondered and re-reviewed the guidance from the school of government on recusal because I worship at this church and am a member and concluded that my recusal wasn't necessary in this case. But I will say that I'm very encouraged by the site plan, the deliberate nature of the design. It's gone through quite a lot of deliberation in the church. Matters including the parking have been discussed extensively. This is a significantly downscaled design from early schematics that were considered 2 years ago. And I can say that those folks I've spoken to in the church are really very, very excited about this project. And as a citizen in Pittsboro, I'm excited about it because I think it's yet another sign of continued investment in our downtown area. And it's going to be a very attractive facility. I think the facility will be open to some measure of programming, is what I'm hearing speculation about. Perhaps some kind of events inviting the public in a large gathering space. And I very much support the site plan approval.
So there'll be two churches.
Two structures.
That they both will be serving
Sanctuary.
sanctuary.
Yes.
If I may, the goal is not to create a new sanctuary that is going to compete as a church with the existing, but to provide a space that can serve the population of Pittsburgh in a new way for gathering and worship.
I am aware of the fact that this is a church which extends itself to the community quite a bit in the building at the back, and that has been a genuine gift to the community. And the idea that the fellowship hall might be another meeting space, because quite frankly, when it comes to finding a space for meetings, we had to meet at the ag building the other day just because we're quite short of general meeting spaces, so that would be quite welcome if that was.
I know when I worked for Habitat for Humanity, Pittsburgh United Methodist was very generous with their space for trainings for future homeowners to learn about responsible homeownership. And I know that the church is very very community-minded.
And the church community has also experienced tremendous growth in recent years. I gather that we are exceptional among United Methodist churches in North Carolina in continuing to grow even through the 2008 recession. Most congregations are experiencing contraction rather than growth. So the space is definitely needed.
Any further questions, or is there a motion?
I make a motion we should approve site plan.
Second. Moved by Jay Farrell, seconded by Pamela Baldwin. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. Motion carries. Thank you.
I'm quite shocked that churches are exempt from.
I am too.
Okay, we need to.
Especially with the nursery. Maybe Michael Fiocco would work on that issue for us. Sprinklers. Sprinklers in their church. Right. Our next item is the site plan review for the Tinker Solar plant.
Strata Solar has submitted plans for approval. The proposal is to construct a solar farm in which solar panels will be erected on approximately 44.88 acres along Moncure-Pittsburgh Road across from the Charlie Brooks Road intersection. The property is currently zoned PDD. These plans have been reviewed in accordance with the town's applicable development ordinances by the appropriate departments. Staff cannot recommend approval of this site plan as it is incomplete. The Chatham Park Master Plan states that 1/20th of an acre of open space shall be provided for every 1,000 gross square feet of non-residential development. Though this site plan differs from most in that it does not include a building, staff finds that this plan still falls under the classification of non-residential development and is therefore subject to the open space requirement. Staff recommends that open space calculations for this site be based upon the area of the racks, requiring the provision of 22.13 acres of open space. The applicant is able to provide approximately 19 acres of open space within the leased area. The remaining open space would need to be provided off-site. The applicant and Chatham Park interpret the master plan requirement to be applicable only to non-residential buildings. According to this interpretation, no open space would be required. This site plan was brought before the planning board on September 6th. The board posed questions regarding screening of the site, but ultimately found the plans to be satisfactory and in a vote of 6-0 recommended approval. However, at the time of planning board review, the applicant was willing to provide open space. Therefore, the board's recommendation is based on a site plan which would meet staff's interpretation of the master plan open space requirement.
All right, your questions for either Victoria or the developer?
Well, I am very surprised that we are interpreting anything other than commercial or non-residential buildings as the square footage mentioned in the 22 million square feet. In our own ordinance, in our site plan review process, we talk about the site plan being required for any non-residential development over 3,000 square feet. And it has been the interpretation of this town for as many years as I've been on the board, that means square footage of the building. And I think in the same vein, the master plan was always interpreted, understood, those 22 million square feet were buildings and not solar farm, not a commercial parking lot, not a ball field, but building square footage.
I think in this case, solar panels would count as a building. I mean, this is taking up a lot of space. This is a constructed site.
So it's a parking lot.
Not the same thing. This is a functioning, this is machinery, and it's creating energy.
Is a light pole square footage? I mean, this has less of an impact than a parking lot, because this is not deemed impervious surface that has a stormwater requirement. I'm not. I'm basing it on my understanding and my interpretation of the master plan. That's the simple fact. And I have, on numerous occasions, discussed the point that our ordinance says 3,000 square feet. And every single time we've talked about that, the answer has been square footage of a building.
I'd like to hear staff's reasoning for saying that this
simply, there's some conflicting language in the master plan where it does say GSF, the gross square does. And then there's, in the open space element or component to the master plan, it just says non-residential development. So there's some wordsmithing that probably just didn't get carried over. Chatham Park is attempting to tie up that loose end in the element. So if you went to the open space element, it would reference to non-residential development, including buildings. But here we're in this gray area where we have some conflicting language in the master plan. We do have a proposed open space element that would clarify that language. We thought that it was appropriate for you all to have this discussion. I think the applicant was thinking that it was appropriate for you all to have that discussion. I would just like to clarify, I think under Commissioner Fioco's interpretation is that even this plan shouldn't be before you at all because it's a non-residential, it's not a building. And I would differ to say that is not the case.
Well, but the master plan says that all development plans will be submitted. So I have argued.
But you're also, I would, at a different time, maybe we should have a discussion as to that, because I believe that our current zoning ordinance reads that all non-residential development is over 3,000 square feet comes before this board. That would include any development that disturbs the land 3,000 square feet.
Well, so that has been my position, that a 400-acre parking lot, I think, should come before this board for approval.
Okay.
And the interpretation has been no. That shouldn't, because if there's a building less than 3,000 square feet or doesn't include a building at all, then it wouldn't require a site plan. I know that's it. Trust me, I've been.
And one of the things that we'll definitely clean up in the so that could be a discussion for another time. You all may want to hear from the applicant. I know they have some thoughts on this as well, and that maybe they can give you some insight better for the staff.
Jeff, before you
go ahead.
In your calculation of the area, was that area of each panel or area of the vertical
panels
as changed, as diminished by the angle? See what I'm saying? Was it an overhead?
Victoria might be able to answer that.
We were given the number from the engineer.
Yeah.
We discussed it. He said we'll do the area of the racks, and it was provided to us.
Okay. I'm curious if the area of the racks is straight overhead or if it is the area of the panel.
The area of the panel is the panel area multiplied by how many panels.
Okay. All right. So that's on the generous side.
Was there another question for staff before we bring up the applicant?
Did you have a question? Yes, I would just be interested to know, you said that the planning board recommended that we count this as expected open space. I'd like to hear, I was not at that meeting, I just wonder if you could tell us what they said about that.
Well, the plan that was before them, this was not a discussion because it was going to be provided. This really came up within less than 2 weeks ago. And with their interpretation differing from staff, it sort of has differed all along for the last couple of months, even prior to the planning board, but there was an agreement, or we thought there was, that, well, we've got enough room to do it, and there's enough area, we can do this. I think Chatham Park, and they can speak for themselves, but they thought about it, and maybe this is setting precedent, and they don't want to do that on what they classify as something that would not require open space. In their eyes, it's gross square footage of building, and not just non-residential development. But certainly they can address that. But the plan board really didn't have this discussion because it wasn't an issue. If it had been, their recommendation may have been different than what it was and what it is today.
But your recommendation would be that the open space would be required?
Well, that's how we're interpreting the ordinance, and we try to check off the boxes of, is this meeting the ordinance or the master plan? And in our opinion, as submitted to you all today, without the open space calculation, within that gray area, that it's not complete. But that's really for you all to sort of give us some guidance on that.
But it is non-residential development, though.
Correct.
It is, but there's conflicting language in the master plan where it says gross square footage of non-residential development, and then another part that says non-residential development. So I think if the writers of the master plan had to do it over again, they would be very clear as to what non-residential development constitutes.
I think it's pretty clear. It's gross square footage.
Yeah, I think that's the preceding language. Then when you get to the open space portion of the master plan. So if you read the first go at it, and it says gross square footage, but then you go on and you read later in the master plan, non-residential development, there's nothing there. So yeah, it's just a interpretation, and I'm sure the applicant can speak to their thoughts. Yeah. Okay.
So this is my trifecta for the evening. Ken Eagle here this time on behalf of the applicant for this site plan, as well as for Chatham Park Investors, the overall developer at this point. First of all, we're not arguing that this is not non-residential development. There are only two types of development in Chatham Park. There's residential and there's non-residential. There's nothing else but those two. So that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that the master plan, in talking about open space, and I'm going to read you the sentence from the master plan that says it better than I can. This is on page 34 of the master plan under the section that deals with open space and parkland. And it says, in addition to the open space required per dwelling unit, 1/20th of an acre for each 1,000 gross GSF, which means gross square feet, of non-residential development shall be provided. In putting together the master plan, it did not occur to us that we would be talking about anything other than buildings, because we were talking about gross square feet. And the common understanding, it's hard to go find a definition of gross square feet if you just go to the dictionary and start looking for it. But if you start Googling and you look for things, you find gross square footage defined in terms of buildings. Most of the discussions are about gross square footage or net square footage, excuse me, and they're talking about buildings. So we do feel very strongly that that was the intent of the master plan, and that, again, this open space element talks about gross square footage of non-residential development. We think it's appropriate for the site plan to be here because this is a development, as we said. A couple of other things that I'd like to mention is, I think it came up in the presentation that based on the calculation of the square footage of the actual solar panels themselves, that would translate into 22 and some change acres of open space, and that on the site 19-something acres could be required. The reason that there is land on the site that will not have solar panels on it is because we, Chatham Park, in dealing with Strata Solar, required a perimeter buffer around the solar panels themselves. And so that's a big part, that and a creek that runs along one of the boundaries, that's a big part of the open space area, if you will, for that site. Commissioner Bonus brought up something a little while ago that I think is a good point to discuss, and that is the fact that it's not likely that this will be a solar farm site forever. As a matter of fact, this whole thing is going to be a leased site to the applicant, to Tinker Strata Solar, not a site that's conveyed to them to own in fee simple. And so to require, as you know, the master plan also requires, as a minimum, no matter what the level of development ultimately is in Chatham Park, that 1,320 acres of open space be provided. That's true if we develop the maximum amount of residential units and non-residential gross square footage, or something less than that. That still has to be provided, and that, of course, will be provided because it's a requirement. If we have to put open space around these solar panels that are part of the 1,320 acres, that's going to be permanently dedicated open space. That can be a really difficult problem later on when it's no longer a solar panel site, no longer a solar farm, and you're trying to configure development to deal with the permanent open space that's just around a field at that point in time.
If it was a building, you would be required to have open space. So if this is not likely to remain a solar plant, it's very likely to be a building of some sort. And so in that sense, I think it's important to set aside it as open space now if you think it's not always going to be a solar plant. I'd like to point out that the name of this is Tinker Solar Plant, and to compare it to a parking lot is not accurate. This is going to be a structure that has to be constructed. It's going to be generating electricity. So it's not a parking lot. It's going to be a business that generates revenue. To me, this crosses the line. This is a building. It may not be your traditional building with solar panels, but it's going to be a plant. Like it says up there in your title, it's a solar plant. And just because it's not traditional structure, like if this was generating electricity through, say, a nuclear power plant or something like that, it's a different kind of building. But it's nonetheless a solar plant, a business that cannot be compared to a parking lot. That's my opinion.
I agree. Well, a parking lot can generate a lot of revenue. It can.
You don't call it a parking plant.
No,
Just point that out. This is called a solar plant.
That's right, and there is not a building on this site. There is nothing about a solar panel meets the definition of a building.
I think there's a fine. I agree that this is a not traditional building, but I think it would qualify. It has to be constructed. It's not the same as a parking lot.
It has to be constructed.
Well,
but the intent of the master plan was to base this upon gross square footage.
I'm disappointed that Chatham Park is even questioning this 22 acres of open space for the town. I'm sorry, I'm really disappointed.
Especially when 19 acres of it are already there and you're willing to provide because of your requirement for buffer.
This is our requirement.
That's right.
That we have self-imposed on this site.
I understand that. But it's not like taking 19 acres that happen to be adjacent to it. You already have sort of designated both the creek and the buffer, and those constitute the 19 acres. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, that's
And
correct.
if this does become something else besides a solar plant, say you do put a building on it, and that the open space is not satisfied, it's too late at that point.
I'm going to go back and change that. You can't go back and change that.
So I think that's a very important point, and I'll reiterate Commissioner Foley's point that this is construction, and the people who build these plants refer to it as construction. And And we are, as a community, losing between 27 and 30 acres of woodland, forest. There's wildlife implications. There's cooling in the community, the implications of services that those trees provide, and the unique forest soil that's provided, the services that are provided by the unique forest soil, which is not going to be present when the panels are put in place. The soil will change, and when we were dealing with the other solar farm, I thought it really highly questionable that there was some interpretation by somebody somewhere that solar panels don't represent impervious surface. I don't want to revisit that, but I want to question the concept. It's very clear that a piece of glass does not absorb water. And it's very clear to me also that the angle of those panels, being such as it is, even in the drawing it shows that the area of the panel actually based on the geometric positioning of the slant is less than the area of the panel. It's only 10 foot wide. That's intriguing to me, so I will acknowledge that there is less impervious surface than the area of the panel as it's spec'd from the factory. But I think it is absolutely true that we're losing something significant here, and that we should ask for open space to be designated. I am intrigued, though, at the idea that it's permanent. And so, Mr. Jones, are you still with us?
Yes, sir.
How does that work?
Well, remember at our meeting, our workshop a few weeks ago when we were speaking of open space, and we talked about big O open space, that 1320 that would be required, and small O open space may be open space that the applicant or the developer provides for its residents and provides for the town, but it's not part of that 1320. I think what we're talking about here and basing it off the formula of 1/20th per gross square footage, this would be part of the big O open space that would be encumbered forever, as essentially how we're doing it. I do believe that the master plan allows for the open space to be somewhere else, so it doesn't necessarily have to be at this location, it could be somewhere else. And that's what staff had talked to Chatham Park about, if this was going to be a requirement, that it might not be here because we understand that this location is not going to be, well, it's going to probably redevelop in the future. And if you have this donut hole, this donut of open space around where the panels are, and it's encumbered forever, then that's going to be challenging for future development. So I think Chatham Park could get creative and figure out where that open space has to be. But they chose to go this route instead of figuring out where open space might be.
Well, I very much appreciate that clarification. That helps a lot. And I will say that I am strongly inclined to support the decision of our planning board and support the judgment of our staff at this time. And I believe that would mean that we would need to hear back from Chatham Park as regards their plans to fulfill that request.
If that was the desire of the majority of the board was to see the open space provisions taken care of with this plan, you would most likely want to table and then send that back to staff for us to work with Chatham Park.
So my concern is that we are basing a requirement, well, we have a requirement that uses the language gross square footage, which in planning parlance, building parlance means building, means an enclosed, habitable space. We are now saying that a solar panel is the equivalent of a building, and I don't know where that stops, because there is a very long gravel driveway to this site, which is clearly non-residential development. So many, many things are non-residential development, but the master plan says open space is associated with gross square footage, which is buildings. If we start down the path of calling things other than buildings gross square footage, it will not stop. And it will include the park and ride, 6-acre park and ride lot. That is non-developed, non-commercial, non-residential development. So I simply do not want to start down this path. I don't want us to go there. You can call something a plant all you want, but if it is not a building, it should not have any requirement for open space because it is based on a building. So I'm very, very concerned about what else we're going to call a building when it is not a building.
I think a parking lot, a ride lot is clearly a parking lot. I don't think there's any question about that.
Yeah, I don't see any risk of slippery slope here. I think I can't envision any other technology other than perhaps covered parking, like at the airport. There's a for-profit parking lot that I like to use because it's a little bit less expensive and they've got better lighting. And it's canopies. A bunch of canopies out there. Well, that's certainly construction. That's certainly structures. And I believe that would be designated as impervious surface. And the bottom line for me is that, again, we are losing forest land. And I'm looking at the Google map right now. That's the use. That's the present use. It's forest. According to Google's most recent satellite photos. Has it?
So do you believe that solar panels counts against the 22 million gross square feet of building?
I think that's another question.
It's the same question. If a square footage of a building has to have a certain amount of open space associated with it, and we're saying a solar panel has to have a certain amount of open space associated with it, it is therefore a building and being deducted from 22 million square feet. I don't think anyone intended that. Gross square footage.
On the face of it, I don't object to it, Commissioner Fiocco, because again, this is a highly commercial development. It's definitely going to generate revenue. It is definitely going to have environmental impacts.
What does revenue? A farm generates revenue. A field is
solar farms generate far more revenue than agriculture.
Oh, so now it would have to be a certain amount of revenue.
No.
You could argue for square footage of solar panels too. It's construction. It's
Yeah.
something that is
We
constructed.
used the word gross square footage so that everyone understood it was building. It didn't use
Right now, the language says non-residential. This is
non-residential gross square footage of non-residential. That's what it says.
Agree with our
And
staff.
so, if we're talking about something that's constructed, parking lots are constructed. They should not, I don't believe.
Maybe we need to make a motion and then see how the board sees.
Or alternatively, you might want to table this and let the staff provide you whatever other additional information or examples from other jurisdictions or information that might assist you in being able to make this decision.
If we have a motion, then we would know what it's on.
Jeff, do you believe that the solar panel is gross square footage?
Not in the terminology that would be used in normal building practices.
Yeah.
Before we go any further, I'm sure everybody's aware of my math skills and all like this, but the 120, the 442,000 628 square feet. And that comes up to 22 acres, correct?
Yeah, the engineer might be able to speak to his calculation of how that comes up.
But do we have anywhere where we require 50% of land as open space? I mean, this is where I'm coming from, a 44-acre solar plant, and it's requiring 22 acres of open space. Now, I was looking at the map, and it looks like Chatham Park owns the land that is on all sides of it. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Well, and if you read back here, the remaining open space would need to be provided off-site. Okay. If we do not use all this open space, and Chatham Park has the land around it, and down the road, they decided to develop this or whatever, wouldn't that land that's buffered right up to it could be charged into that open space? Am I totally confusing everybody?
No, I got you. I could see that.
But where I'm a little confused is 22 acres of open space and 44 acres of land.
Glad you brought that up. 44 acres, 44.88 acres, and requiring 22.13 acres. Can you explain that a little?
Commissioners, Louis Ione, I'm a developer with Strata Solar. I have spent the last 3 or 4 weeks digging through the $1 million worth of planning documents I would estimate. And it's astounding the attention that was devoted to open space. And the minimum open space you will get, 1,320 acres. I think this was the point Mr. Eagle was trying to make up a few minutes ago, is that if you take this 22 acres now, it's conceivably this 22 acres that won't be allocated later. But I think if we had a guess, you're probably going to wind up with more open space than, based on the North Village small area plan, you're going to wind up with more open space than the minimum. So I don't think Chatham Park has any intention of avoiding open space. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years. This is an extraordinary master plan. Consultants from all over the country, every stream, every leaf, every steep slope has been studied. So to create a donut of open space out in the middle of nowhere that won't be touched otherwise for 30 years, I don't get it. When it initially came up, I thought, well, 20 acres of open space, we'll pay for it, we'll pay. Then when it became an issue and I started studying the documents, it's kind of hard to disagree with Chatham Park. Mr. Farrell, you said about 20 minutes ago, when he used this document, we need to use it. Gross square feet has a common meaning. It's like 5 means that. Gross square feet means a building. And as Mr. Fiocco said, if you're going to start just changing the meanings of words, then I think that's what the concern is.
What's your name again, sir?
Louis Ione.
Mr. Ione?
Yes.
I appreciate your opinions on the master
Yes.
plan. But I think the question had to do with total leased acreage.
Yeah.
44.88.
Yeah.
And the calculation of, not impervious surface, the calculation
of
of developed area.
Staff has determined that we have, I guess, 11, if it's 22 acres, we have roughly 10 and 11 acres of actual panel. That's 1,000 square feet of building. A 20th of an acre is about 2,100 square feet. So for every 1,000 square feet of building, there's 2,000 plus square feet of open space. You're going to get your open space. In fact, what's happening in Chatham Park is fairly unusual. You're getting a rush of commercial development years before the first home is built. I'm a developer, and I was a developer in Apex. I can't tell you how long we heard, we're going to stop this residential development until we get some commercial. You're getting the opposite, and you're getting this large allocation of open space. The North Village small area plan calls for 1,000 acres, 1,100 acres of open space on its own. Out of 2,000 acres, 50%. The more I think about it, it's just very hard to disagree with Chatham Park. But it boils down to if you're not gonna observe the definition of gross square footage, that's the question. That's the action I guess you're going to take, or you're talking about taking.
I think solar farms were part of the question of whether or not that was something.
If they're what?
I think at the time that a lot of the wordage was created, that there was no such thing as a solar park. I think a solar plant falls in between a fine line.
Right. There's no ambiguity about what gross square feet.
Solar farms were around long before 4 years ago. I'm curious to hear what Mr. Space has to say.
Yeah, I was just going to touch on in the calculation of that. So the requirement is 1/20th of an acre per 1,000 square feet. So the total panels, we had just over 400,000 square feet. So divide that by 1,000, you're left with 400, 1/20th of an acre, thus just over 20 acres.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions or discussion?
I've heard our planning director tell us that a solar panel is not gross square footage. Mr. Messick, is a solar panel gross square footage?
Gross square footage is a measurement of area. I mean, you can take the area of anything, but whether or not it's something that ought to count for open space is, entirely different matter.
Common meaning of gross square footage.
And I'm sure it means building.
Okay, so planning director says it's a building. Our town attorney says it's a building.
I didn't hear you say that it was officially a building, because this is still, planning director still will stand by the fact that this is a solar plant. It has to be constructed. To say it's a parking lot is ridiculous.
A parking lot has to be constructed. A sidewalk has to be constructed.
We're
repeating ourselves.
What does generation of electricity have to do with it?
Because it's a business. It's a plant that is generating a product.
It is not gross square footage. It is not a building.
Okay, we're going to...
I'd like to make a motion that we follow Mr. Messick's suggestion, and that we table this for further information from staff, and we consider it with a little bit more data, perhaps, and maybe a little bit more reflection, contemplation.
Can I ask one question before we do this? In this last set, the remaining...
Excuse me, J. Farrell, we need a second before we can have discussion.
I'll second that.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I have just one question to clarify my mind. The remaining open space would need to be provided off-site. So if Chatham Park does not use this 19 or 22 acres of open space, it would be put back into the master plan.
Right, so if they chose not to use any of the land around these panels and chose to go somewhere else on their property, I believe the master plan affords them that opportunity to do that. So it could be somewhere else.
What is wrong with that?
Sounds like we're just having discussions on the motion, and so Jay, I agree with you. I agree with you. I agree with you. I think nothing wrong with that. In fact, I wouldn't be opposed to discussions that if Chatham Park was so inclined to leave the 19 acres as simple buffer and not as formal capital O, capital S open space. But I think I'm hearing consensus emerging, and we'll revisit it after we table it, that solar fields are
form of non-residential development.
I'm sorely mistaken if you hear consensus. And I believe...
Okay, maybe it's just a vote.
Well, that's exactly what it sounds like it's going to be. But I am warning everyone that if we start changing the meanings of the master plan, I think we're going down a very slippery slope.
I think we can clarify, we can define it more clearly. Say that this is not, say this is equivalent to a parking lot. It needs to be more clearly defined.
It is clearly not gross square footage.
We're not going to say that.
I think the problem is what is confusing and adds to the difficulty of it is when it says non-residential development. That is what's throwing the problem in there. If it says something a little different, I don't know what, that would say maybe yes. And I want to know when we do this, there are other people certainly that has solar farms and how that, when staff comes back, how is that defined? Impossible.
Commissioner, if I could just make one comment about what you just said. Again, there's only two types of development in Chatham Park. There's residential and non-residential. And with respect to residential, open space is based on a dwelling unit. And so the way to do it with non-residential that we proposed in the master plan was gross square footage. And hindsight being wonderful, if I had known we would be having this discussion tonight, we probably would have been a lot clearer than just leaving it at gross square footage. We didn't have any question that that would be a solar panel or a parking lot or a light pole or anything but a building. And so, but those are the only two ways we can calculate open space under the master plan, or just dwelling unit or gross square footage.
I do understand that, but I think that's what got everybody sort of.
And gross square footage is paired with non-residential development.
Right, right. But I think that's what's causing the problem. And I don't know any other way to define it, but I just would like if they could get some additional information regarding other solar panels, because I know that there are some. And
What
bring
about
that
things
back.
like lumber mills? Lumber mills are outdated. They don't have a lot of square footage, but it's, that counts. So I think there's a lot of things that are outdoors, and this is technology that has an impact on the land. And it's
The board ready to vote on the motion? John Bonnett's made the motion to table for further input from the staff, seconded by Pamela Baldwin. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. Number 5 under old business, Fred Royal will be leading us in a discussion about the flood damage prevention ordinance.
Good evening. I hope this is a relatively simple process. The flood damage prevention ordinance, as proposed, as we discussed at a previous meeting and through the public hearing process, is based on a state model ordinance that's new. It has new definitions and some new language in it that coincides with the National Flood Insurance Program recommendations. So this ordinance is in place so that we can use our flood maps that will be effective November the 17th of this year. And the FEMA, the National Flood Insurance Program, requires this process to take place before November 17th, or we will be no longer a member in good standing with the National Flood Insurance Program, which means all of our citizens with flood insurance would be in jeopardy of losing their flood insurance. So we planned this well in advance, I believe, and here we are tonight reviewing the proposed final flood protection ordinance. It has all the basic elements of our original or existing ordinance. which includes 2 feet of freeboard above the base flood elevation. It defines, it clearly defines terms that meet the National Flood Insurance Program. The term development, coincidentally, is in the ordinance. Not that it has anything to do with our previous discussion, but just as a word of interest. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions. Unfortunately, I didn't bring a copy with me, so if you refer to something, you would have to read the entire piece you're asking me about, please. Thank you. I don't recall what it says.
Fred.
Yes.
Here you go.
Thanks.
I'm going to let sleeping dogs fly.
Questions for Fred?
So, Fred, I think you're saying that this must be adopted in order for folks to qualify for flood insurance?
To qualify or retain their existing flood insurance. Yeah. By November 17th.
What kind of leeway do we have on the language in this? I think you said model. Is this a model ordinance that basically we've got to adopt?
It's a model ordinance recommended by the state, and they've reviewed it. We've edited it. We've done our own edits internally and given it to the state to review. They have to be in agreement with it, essentially, and they're in agreement with this. If we want to propose more edits, I think we could, technically, and ask them to review our suggested edits. We are just running into a clock type issue. So if there's more edits, if we can't handle the edits with the staff level, and we need to go to the state, because if we feel like there's substantial that they need to sign off on, we would probably have to do that. So that would put us closer to November 17th.
What kind of edits do you think could be made to the substance?
That we have made?
Yeah.
At their suggestion, we added and deleted some definitions. They cleared up some definitions related to like vertical datum, technical items.
So I got this document that's there. I guess the markup of what changed between 17 and 2007 model ordinances. And I'm assuming that our ordinance was based on the 2007 version, and that we probably made minor.
Yeah, we actually adopted an ordinance in 1999, the original.
Originally, but it was redone in 2007.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then, by looking at this, I can see what has changed from 2007 to 2017.
Right.
But not necessarily precisely what edits we, as a town, put forth.
Well, there's some optional provisions.
Right.
And you have opted to go with the options.
Some of the options.
Okay.
Here's an example of one option that I chose not to go with, and I confirmed it was legal, which was the model ordinance requires 3 elevation certificates. One before you do anything. The second one after you've done a little bit of work that you've established your reference elevation, and the third as like an as-built type record drawing. And I argued that what's the purpose of the first one if they haven't even done anything? And they said, good point. And I'm like, do I have to? And they, no. So I deleted the first one and required the second to. So they build something that they can measure. They give it to me. I look at it. Yes, keep moving. Then they can finish building, and then we finish. That's an example of the type of thing we've worked through.
Sounds like a good edit.
I tried to find a lot of things that just didn't make a whole lot of practical sense.
But as a practical matter, you have to shoot the elevations before you started the work in order to know not to go above or below the elevation. So, I mean, whether they submitted it to the town is irrelevant. mean, somebody's got to do that work before you know where to start building. So you can't just start building and then shoot the elevation. So there was some logic for the requirement. Well, whether it has to be submitted to Fred or not, I guess this was the point of the ordinance. But as a practical matter, you can't know whether you're above or below the level until you make that determination. And you better do it at the beginning rather than in the middle or at the end.
We typically have meetings with the developer before they build to try to limit errors on their part. Yeah. Especially when it comes to a house.
Are there further questions? Is there a motion?
I move to approve the revised flood damage prevention ordinance.
Second. Moved by John Bonnet, seconded by Bette Wilson Foley. Further discussion, or are we ready to vote? Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. What we don't need. Our people don't need it.
We don't have a whole lot of floodplain around here, so it's not good.
There is no new business, but we have the manager's update, and we will have that at this time.
Hi, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll be brief. The new town hall project, currently, as you are aware, authorized to go ahead to seek a contract with Hobbs Architects, not associates, to develop the contract. I'll be meeting with Hobbs tomorrow to help shape up the scope of work, and then hopefully come back to you soon on a document with regard to that, and just keep that process in mind, and we'll be updating you on any changes on that as we move forward. Meetings and events, don't forget about October 20, Opportunity Chatham. And if I could just ask, I think last meeting I mentioned this, that we had a table reserved. I think a couple of you had said that you were interested in attending, and I didn't write down who that was, so I was wondering if I could get. Okay. All right. If you change your mind, or if anybody else wants to attend, then please let me know by the 17th, by October 17th. So thank you for clarifying that. Tomorrow there's a dedication for a Habitat home on 74-acre Acorn Lake Park, Acorn Park Lane, and I'll be attending that. You're certainly welcome to attend as well. I've got a hopefully short speaking part during that, so but we're excited to have them, and it's been a great organization to work with. On October 28th, we have the street fair coming up, so believe it or not, that's going to be on us before we know it, and staff is planning away and hoping to ensure another good event with excellent weather. Knock on wood, we haven't had bad weather since I've been here. We maybe do, but I don't know, I got a feeling we'll be all right. So, just some other items. Working with Duke Energy on the pricing for the electrical vehicle charging stations. As I believe I updated previously, we received a bid from a vendor. It was fairly local. The pricing that we received was over what we'll be receiving in grant funding from Duke Energy. And so I'm circling back and verifying with Duke Energy on what might be available in consideration of that, and then also too with the vendor. And so I'm going to hear back from the vendor on that. Chatham County RFQ for the government annex, the old ag building, and the Dunlap building. That RFQ has been completed. They've, I believe, been in discussion with the vendor for that. I'll have a meeting with county staff on that on October 23rd. So I'm excited to provide you some updates with that very important planning process. And I think, too, we'll be needing to figure out ways to make sure the town stays engaged, as it is a very important part of our downtown. So, again, looking forward to keeping updated on that. At the last meeting, we talked a little bit about Hearn Road and some needs for possible water system improvements on Hearn Road. And we've had staff looking at that since the last meeting. McGill, because of their work on the interconnection study, is also going to give us some input by the end of this week. I think we're looking at 3 different options. Famous last words, they should fall within the realm of affordability, but we want to double check with, and just that's the reason why we would want to double check with McGill on that. I think also at the last meeting we discussed about some possible water system improvements on the south side of town, outside of town limits as well. And going back through the archives on that, it appears as if John Poteet, shortly after I first arrived, or just before I arrived, had done some inquiry on that possible looping project south of town. The pricing on that was considerably higher than what we're looking at, for what it's worth, here at Hearn Road. But I'll give you a little bit more detail on that as we go over these options. So that will continue. On the staff front, the police department would like to welcome Sergeant David Deshays. He's been on board, I think, for a couple weeks now. It's around tonight if he was out there and pull him in. He comes to us from the Carrboro Police Department. He backfills a position that was vacated when Sergeant Swain was promoted to staff, technically promoted to staff sergeant. And so we're excited to have talking to Sergeant Deshays a little bit tonight. Very pleasant officer. I think is going to be a great addition to our staff. As you know, a few weeks ago we had, some of you may be aware, a few weeks ago, Michelle Meyer, who was doing inspection services for the town for about a year and a half or so, right up until basically the time she had an accident about this time last year, is attending truck driver school. And so she's pursuing a dream of sorts on that front. We're fortunate in that we've been able to replace that position on a part-time, currently part-time basis with inspections right now in order to keep up. We'll evaluate whether or not we want to bring that on full-time, and so we'll let you know about that as well. Upcoming meetings, I think there's even as fluid and as empty as this looks, it's more fluid than empty, really. We're probably looking at, on October 23rd, possibly looking at discussing Group 2 and Group 3 additional elements. The Chatham Transit, I don't believe, will be, I was for some reason thinking that was my mistake. I was thinking that was on the current planning board agenda. That may be reviewed on November 13th. We're tentatively looking at the annual audit at the next meeting, although that may not be definite. And then the Chatham Park on November 13th, you recall the Chatham Park reclamation facility is subject to further planning board review, so we have that scheduled during the 13th. I think we had an annexation issue tabled from tonight. It'll be going in on November 13th. And then it appears as if Clean Tech, you'll recall, was sort of a consortium of Triangle area professionals in municipal infrastructure that are going to have an expertise towards sustainable infrastructure solutions. We had a few weeks ago, or a few meetings ago, had that meeting scheduled. It sounds as if they will be here on October 23rd. So that would be in addition to that one as well. So these are the last 4 meetings that we have. I'm sure we'll have these filled in. The last 4 meetings we have for this calendar year. Recall that the second meeting in December is a sort of a holiday, considered a holiday, and so much like December, or much like July, we only have 1 meeting in December. So believe it or not, time flies, and I'm sure we'll be busier than it appears. Those last 2 meetings we can. And with that, I will tap out and open it up for any other questions or concerns that you may have.
Where are we on the hotel incentives? Are we calendaring that again for review or?
Very good question.
That was actually brought up at the, which meeting was that? The one at the community college. I mean at the Ag Center. Yeah. Do we want to bring that back? Do I understand that the county has revised their incentive plan? Perhaps that would be good for us to have an idea of where the incentive plans so that we know where they are. And
they've revised?
That's what I had understood. Does anybody?
I'd like to know.
Yeah. I'd like to know too.
Okay, so what action would you like to see as far as the hotel is concerned?
Well, why don't we bring that back on the 13th? It looks like we've got enough for the 23rd. And then in the meantime, we can find out if the county has changed their plan and Chatham Park might have some feelings about it going forward. Or alternatives to it. I mean, I certainly am open to alternatives on this.
I want to see a hotel.
Yeah.
So let's keep talking about it. I want to bring it back. Absolutely.
All right. Any further questions for Brian Griswold?
Brian, I just have one on that New Hearn Road. Would that be able to have any hydrants up there?
Yeah, I think it includes at least one hydrant. The different things that we're contemplating. And increase in size and increase in pressure. So it's a question of whether or not we'd be looping it. But we'll come back.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Brian?
I apologize for missing this, but what are the hours of the street fair? Yeah.
We generally open officially at around 9.
Street fair? Yeah. It should be 10 to 5.
9 to 5.
10 to 5.
Where they're setting
10 to 5, I believe.
Where they're setting up around, where they're setting up before light, really, and then we're breaking down. We're broken down by sundown usually. Officially, it's like 9 to 5, 10 to 5.
Okay, that's great. Looking forward to that. And I'd also like to express appreciation, Mr. Grusbeck, for your work on the Hearn water situation. Thank you. And these updates are always so helpful and informative. I would really appreciate getting back to having them printed in our packages. And for my purposes, I don't feel like it's necessary to have visuals or whatnot. The black and white was perfectly suitable for me, unless there's some need for a particular image. And the packets, I'd also like for us to return to striving to have the packets by Thursday. I certainly benefit by having them sooner than later. And, honestly, I don't know that Mr. Foley has ever asked this, but I think it'd be ideal to have them on Wednesday evening because her day off is Thursday. And that would then give her the opportunity to spend that time making phone calls, reviewing it, researching, reading it. I know that I have found, I feel tremendous pressure to squeeze in the review over the weekend. So
I think returning to Thursdays is something that I definitely agree with. I think in the case, these last 2 agendas, we've had workshops on the Thursdays. The considerable amount of work will be done on the agenda, so staff, mainly Alice and I, have been at the meetings where we would be here actually assembling the packets on those days. So I think on those at least those 2 agendas, I think that's not necessarily the norm.
Makes sense. Sure does. And where do we stand with regard to this, the status of the effort to obtain an appraisal on the value of the NPDES permit?
Yeah, done a little bit of follow-up, had some informal discussions with Davenport, had a discussion with another attorney. It's a rather unique situation that nobody has an easy answer for. It's going to be rather difficult, I think, to answer the question probably as extensively as what you're seeking. There's some different options and alternatives that we can lay out there. I would caution you that I don't think anything is going to be as comprehensive as what you were describing earlier.
To me, it raises another question. Wastewater treatment plant, we're basically turning that over.
Along with the employment of the people who work there.
Basically, we invest a lot of money in that plant. It's basically turning it over.
It's definitely a new purpose.
A lot more capacity.
You're looking at $250,000 plant.
Further questions, or are we ready for commissioner concern? Jay Farrell?
Just one. We had a work session, I guess it was, when the planning board met. Where do we stand with Capital Concrete, I guess, Jeff? They had some questions or something at the last board meeting, planning board meeting, is that correct?
Planning board recommended approval. The plans from the engineers just can't get them correct per things that we need. So that should be here for you at the next meeting. If they can get the plans drawn up correctly and meet all the environmental issues that we have with the project, then we will certainly bring it for you.
All right. That's all I have.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. John?
Yes. I just want to revisit that I promised this board that I was going to do some homework and prepare a resolution, and I apologize that I have not been able to do that. But that resolution still is burning in my conscience and my mind. And again, to remind you all that I think I heard similar concerns from this board that now may not be the right time for Duke Energy to ask for such a very large rate increase amounting to up to $200 impact per year per residence, especially if it's to go for cost of cleanup of coal ash, which they really should be bearing. But I do intend to get that to you, fellow commissioners. I'll resolve to do that before the next meeting so that we have time to hash it out. Thank you.
We have two upcoming events for voter information. On Saturday the 14th, the NAACP is going to be having a candidates forum, and on Tuesday the 17th, the League of Women Voters has a candidates forum. And persons on my right and left are involved in that, and the rest of you are home free for 2 more years. Don't forget we have the tree lighting on the 19th of November, so that means that's before Thanksgiving.
Sunday before.
Pardon?
They always try to do it the Sunday before Thanksgiving.
Okay. 19th. And on the 10th of December is the Christmas parade, so we need to get Alice needs to start buying candy now. So that's always a fun event, and I expect this year that we will overdo ourselves on decorating the golf cart that we've traveled in previous times. So get your imaginations going, not only on the slogan for the county, but also
LBM's still on the 19th, right?
Oh, that's right.
All right.
That's right. Randy?
Mayor, just to keep in the spirit of informing the board of things in town, it's National Hispanic Heritage Month, and the library system is going to have an event on Thursday at Pittsburgh Library at 7 o'clock. So they sent us some information, and I was going to send it over, but I just announce it. If anyone wants to attend, there'll be a panel, and I think there'll be other things they'll be working with Sheriff Roberson on, so forth and so on. I think Chief Crutchfield came when we talked to them about, I invited you about a month ago or 2 months ago, and then they reached out to talk to you because we kind of got crossed on the signals, but it's the same.
Not supposed to know about that.
Exactly.
I haven't heard anything about this one that's going on this week.
But I just got it today, and I'm going to email you, and I want you guys to know about it.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. Is there a motion to go into closed session? So moved. Moved by Pamela Baldwin, seconded by Michael Fiocco. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed. Motion
Yes, please.
All right, ladies and gentlemen.